Okay, hi everyone. So this is the first lecture video for our class Criminal Justice Introduction to Criminal Justice, CJS 100. So real quick, I know I put it as as an announcement that I also tried to send out as quickly as possible, but there were some confusion things. Dr. Jen Robinette, who shows up under course faculty. She is our student success coach for this class. So if you need help with tutoring or you need guidance on where to go for things, she's the person to contact. My name might not show up there, but I am Mr. Alex Wheaton. I am the instructor on this course. Because I have administration access, sometimes it blocks me from being viewed there. So just so you're aware, I am here. I promise. See, look, I'm actually here. But that's one thing that I know some people were confused on, so I want to at least clear that up. Second thing I want to talk about is how to get to the textbook. So I'm not going to spend this first video talking about the syllabus or anything. You're all adults. You can read the syllabus. You can go through the schedule and see when things are due. These videos are going to be exclusively for, going over content in class, things like that. So obviously, this one's a little bit different, but just because I need to go over these things. So as always, start here. This is the folder meant for you to start here. And here's the syllabus, and here is the textbook. Now, when you click on the textbook, it will open up a separate page, and that is this. So this is, our author is Adam McKee, and he's a doctorate, so it's docmckee.com is the official website where his stuff is from. But this is our textbook, and the way you access the text, because this has been a question that's come up, is if you scroll down on this page just a little bit, we have table of contents, and then we have this. So right here we have introductory text, and then we have text and learning resources. The text, the things that you are reading, all come from this, the text. So you can click on chapter 1, introductory text, and it will give us all this. This is all the introductory text stuff. And then you can click on this wonderful next. So because this is an online thing, the author has included, a discussion part from other people. But just clicking on next will take you through each chapter. So that's how you navigate our textbook. So all this stuff, anytime you see this picture, underneath that picture, that's your text. And it goes until you get to this part. So he usually gives key terms, which, you can click on to find definitions. They'll open up in separate things. So there's a lot of possible interactivity as you go through. So if there's something that is highlighted in blue, it's a hyperlink. It's meant to take you somewhere else so you can learn more. So that's important, but the big thing is next will always take you to the next chapter, back will take you to the previous, and contents will take you back to this main page. And so every time you just got to scroll down a little bit, find where you need to be looking, and simply click on text or the introductory text at the beginning of the chapter. So that's how you need to use and access the textbook. So Start Here folder on Blackboard, textbook option, click on it, it'll open that link. On the syllabus, under textbook, there is a hyperlink as well that'll take you to the same place. So please use that. That's how you gain access to the textbook. If you cannot access Blackboard, I wonder how you got access to this video, but we will talk about that separately. All right. Other thing I want to touch on real quickly in this video is how the weekly folders will work. So obviously, each week we'll have a folder. The folders are already made, but there's not always necessarily content in each of these folders yet. So that's why they're not available. But notice this first one, this video holds all the content of week 1 of the class. Inside you will find 2 discussion board posts, quiz 1, and some videos. I do recommend, and this is honest, I recommend waiting to take the quiz until you've at least read the chapter or at least watched this lecture video, because we'll talk about some of those things in this video. But when you click on it, there's the introduce yourself discussion board, which I already see someone has at least put an effort into. Quiz 1, no one's attempted it yet, and discussion board 1. So these are the typical weekly assignments. This will be the same throughout the course. Please do them in a timely manner. You will notice I give you due dates. I always make the due date for this class, other than this introduction. I try to make it so you have a whole week starting Monday morning to the next Monday to do all of your work. Okay? So anyway, that's that. Let's actually get into our content. Let's actually get into what you're here for. So really, the first chapter of our text is the criminal justice system. And so I'll tell you right now, I will be going back and forth between our actual textbook in these videos, as well as the Microsoft Whiteboard application. This will be where I take notes. I will provide the full finished document on Blackboard as well. All right, so the criminal justice system is, this whole first chapter is really, let's talk about what the heck it is. And it is, for all intents and purposes, a kind of broad topic. So I am just going to write some things here and there. The reason why I say you should watch the videos or read the text is because not everything that I write is going to be said, and not everything from the book is going to be written. So it's important to know that. Anyway, if you've had me before, you already know this. So the criminal justice system itself is a umbrella term, and this text likes to use umbrella term or broad term quite a lot, but it's also true. The criminal justice system is not just police, and that's something that I know a good portion of individuals struggle with. We tend to see the first thing, the more common thing. So when most people think criminal justice, they think police, or maybe they think parole officer or prison guard. Like, you could think of very specific things within it, but we tend to forget that's also lawyers and judges and things like that. So the criminal justice system itself is a collection of rules and people working together to protect the public from harm. So everything that I've already said, and things that you probably already know about the criminal justice system, yeah, that's it. This is what it is. It's this nice, broad group collection of rules, collection of people, all for the purpose of protecting the public from harm. And so I feel like this is the right time to mention this. Due to the nature of the criminal justice system and the field and our current political world, there are going to be some heavy topics discussed in this class. I ask that we approach it academically and neutrally without getting too emotionally invested. Those of you that know me, you know what I'm talking about, but we'll get into it as we go through, and we'll kind of approach it as best as possible. And so the criminal justice system, going back to the notes, if we really wanted to think about it, it really is broken into 3 categories. And for argument, that's a C, but police, courts, and corrections. Wow. We're going to pretend like this looks even moderately good. Ugh. Yeah, we're going to pretend like that was better. Okay. Those of you that have had me, you're used to this. Those of you who are new, Hi, I make a lot of weird noises as I'm doing work. Okay, so the three broad areas, and I'm using air quotes, I know you can't see it, but the three broad areas are the police, the courts, and corrections. And so this first chapter does talk a lot more in depth, and we will talk about some of it, but I would like to at least do the broad part real quick. So most people are familiar with the police side of it. That's the officers, that's the sheriff's deputies, the we know those positions. The courts are the other ones that people tend to think about. Usually it's the lawyers, the judges, the public defenders, all these things that you might have heard the terms, especially if you watch like documentary and crime shows. And corrections, this is an area that there is going to be more talk on because we do have a class in particular coming up in corrections as well as a certificate. But it's important to note that corrections is not just prison. It's jails and prisons, but it's also community outreach type stuff and rehabilitation. And so we are going to talk about that. Obviously, things like corrections, we're not going to dive super deep into it in this class, just like we're not going to dive super deep into juvenile justice in this class, even though it does come up. Those are designated for their own classes. Anyway, so the whole thing behind the criminal justice system is, protecting the public from harm and what we often consider to be harmful to the public is crime. And so I guess the question is, what is crime? And so I would urge you, obviously, the textbook gives us an answer, and I'm going to say the answer, but I'd also urge you, even though we're not in a physical classroom together and having this discussion, I ask you to think about what it means to commit a crime. And so, crime, the actual definition, is a violation of some criminal law with no legal justification or excuse. Plain and simple, black and white. You're not allowed to steal, but you stole, you committed crime. Now, if you've taken Professor Higginbottom's philosophy class, or you've taken a psychology class with Dr. Tate, or you've taken FYE with one of several of our instructors, we've talked about some of these things already where, is it really black and white? And so it's important to remember that our definitions are black and white, but the world is not quite that. And we'll get to that as we discuss further. So just remember, crime, it's a bad thing. You don't want to commit a crime. I shouldn't have to say that. All right. And so the other thing that the textbook does go into, and I do want to emphasize here, is that the criminal justice system is kind of a misnomer. And by that I mean it's a misname. It implies that there's only one system, but the text does break down that, it's actually several, especially here in America. So in America, we have the federal system and the individual state systems. So here in Pennsylvania, we have the Pennsylvania Municipal Police, but they have a different set of rules and regulations than New York State Police, than Ohio State Police. Like, there is a distinct difference in how our systems operate. If you want to look at a great historical example, look at the national drinking age. The national drinking age was not uniform across the board. It used to be that New York was 18, Pennsylvania was 21. That's a different in systems. That's a different in laws. So that means what is a crime in PA? It might not be a crime in New York. So it's important to note that. And then obviously at the federal level, that is the across the United States, 100%, we all agree this is not okay. This is why, and again, we're touching very briefly on a currently hot debated topic. We're not getting into an argument, but the overturning of the Roe v. Wade decision, which was a federal statute, that is the difference. That's federal, that says all 50 states have to abide by this. Individual states can make whatever decision they want. So by getting rid of that decision meant that all the states could make whatever law they wanted. That's really the issue of why overturning Roe v. Wade has caused so much distress. There's plenty of other sub-reasons. This is not a law class, so we're not going to get into, the legality of that and everything, but it's important to note that those things directly impact crime, directly are connected to the criminal justice system. And if you read the chapter and you're just listening to this for some extra background or explanation, you already know what I'm talking about. So this is part of that. And so this is something that's important to note. Just in general, the textbook says it, and I wanted to highlight it so you can't see, but I have like 5 pages of notes to go through today, so I just want to keep moving. Rule of law. This is a term that our text uses. The rule of law is that this idea that every person is subject to the law, even those who make the law, interpret the law, and enforce the law. This is where a lot of people get angry and up in arms and say no person is above the law. This is something that kind of is in our system, is this no one truly is above the law. And so that's why, if you can remember all the way back to your sophomore year civics/government class, whatever that might have been, you talked about all the different branches of government and everything. This is it in real life. This is, everything is balanced. One thing plays off of the other. So the rule of law truly is no one is above the law. If you break a law, there is supposed to be a consequence for it. And this, again, opens up a whole thing of ethics and morality that can be discussed in a different situation. All right, and so the most powerful law in the United States, or rather the most important and powerful laws, plural, is the Constitution. And I'm sure at some point in your life you've heard constitutional rights, or it's in the Constitution, or anything involving that. The Constitution is this big body of rules and things that are required. Everyone has something. So this idea that the Constitution is the end-all, be-all. This is why arguments over gun rights and ownership and marriage and the Roe v. Wade, all this stuff comes under, is it protected under the Constitution? So that is the most powerful piece in laws, even to the point where if a federal or state law is actually found to be violating a protection under the Constitution, that law is then considered void. That it cannot be legal because it goes against a constitutional right. So, if you have to remember something important from this whole little thing, it's the Constitution is key. Ooh, that K was sad. I am sorry. Like I said, I get excited when I'm doing this, so I kind of make a mess in my writing. So the Constitution is key. The Constitution is the high thing, and we'll talk a little bit about the court system and everything, because the introduction of this book does have some, it has to talk about all these different things. It's in the textbook. It's not super important. All of this is important, but the appellate courts, the most famous and powerful one that people are familiar with is the Supreme Court. Their main job is to interpret laws and determine the nature and scope of specific civil liberties in the United States. This is do you have the right to do this? This is why, do you have the right to freedom? Do you have the right to own property? That kind of stuff. And so there was a little thing that we should talk about briefly, and that's the exclusionary rule. This is something that is used in the court system still to this day. This is to prevent police misconduct in trials. So we'll come back to it when we talk a little bit more about that. But illegally obtained evidence cannot be admitted in court. If you watch a lot of courtroom dramas, you're familiar with that, or anything of that nature. Like, oh, we can't use it in court. It is a real thing. It's not nearly what it's like on TV, and that's important to note. And I'll kind of say that multiple times throughout this. And even if you have any of our other criminal justice instructors, they'll tell you the same thing. It's not like it is on TV. It gives a good basis. No, it's not even good basis. Forget that. But some things you might be familiar with because of TV. And if that's how you can remember them, that's great. Just know that sometimes they're a little bit different than what you think. All right. So moving on, I did already kind of talk about how criminal justice is a broad term, but police is a broad term too. And so we've used police. I know I have. I'm sure you can think of like 8 million other common phrases to call them. Cops, pigs if you're being offensive a little bit. Like there's plenty of different things, but what exactly is police? Some of the things that are considered police by people wouldn't necessarily fit there, like federal agents. The FBI agents. That doesn't really fit police, but they do, but they don't. It's a whole thing. But it's important to know that when I talk about police, I'm specifically talking about the, excuse me. I'm talking about police officers. I'm talking about sheriffs and sheriff's deputies. Excuse me. Sheriff's deputies. I'm talking about the active on-the-ground troops. I'm talking about the people like detectives and whatnot who are part of the typically smaller level of criminal justice. Obviously, there's some at the larger level, but I want to at least emphasize that when I refer to police, when we're talking, I'm referring to the physical body of the criminal justice system, the people that initiate or rather start the process, the criminal justice process, and we'll talk about that in this chapter. And so it's important to note, specifically, the text talks about this, and this is something that's important to remember, that enforcing the law is a small fraction of what police do every day. So yes, they enforce the law, and if you want to be real broad about it, a lot of things that the police do and a lot of officers do is enforce the law. But they maintain order, they provide services to communities they serve, they investigate crimes, they collect evidence, and they work with prosecutors to obtain convictions in court. Their job is not to just drive around all day and make sure you don't speed, you don't run that red light, you don't buy illegal drugs, you don't sell illegal drugs. No, that's a small part of their job. Their job is more widespread, all over the place. So it's important to note that there is a difference there, that it's not just enforcing the law. So this is another thing, though, that's directly related to that. Because police and officers, one of their things is, maintaining order. Maintain. Ooh, I liked how that automatically italicized my O. Sorry. This is one of their things is to maintain order, and we call it policing when they, do a routine route where they monitor and go through an area and have their presence known. That's a term for policing, but when they're doing that and they maintain order, the reality is they are constantly engaged with the community. They're engaged with everyday citizens, they're engaged with suspects, they're engaged with perpetrators, they're engaged with just about everyone. And so, because they are dealing with multiple, sometimes referred to as actors, which is weird, but when you're dealing with multiple different groups of people in that kind of situation, you need to be able to have some freedom to make decisions. And this is where the kind of scary argument conversation comes into play with a lot of people. Police officers, pretty much any officer for that matter, they are told to use discretion. It is their discretion that plays a big part of this. So on the fly, an officer has these options when they're policing, when they're maintaining order, when they're in an area. They can choose to ignore offenses. So if they catch you running through a red light, they can choose, what, not important. I don't need to actually go after that person. Or they could. They can issue you a verbal warning. They can issue a written warning. They can give you a citation, which is the official term for, getting a ticket. You're being issued a citation, traffic citation, a violation, all those things. That's what those are. And they can also formally arrest individuals. So that's where, again, this kind of thing gets in trouble, is the formally arresting a person. I'm sure you are familiar with it. If you are not, I'm surprised and shocked, but currently in our current political world today, there are a lot of situations and circumstances and videos of primarily black individuals being arrested by police officers, and there is an excessive use of force, and so that is where this kind of discretion line gets blurry, and why, despite the fact that it shouldn't need to be said, this is why they can quote unquote get away with it, is because they are using their discretion. Technically speaking, you are allowed to use, quote, reasonable force to apprehend an individual when you're trying to make a formal arrest. That means if they are combative, you can fight back, not to win a fight, but to stop them from causing any harm and arrest them. This is where that issue comes in. What is excessive force? What is reasonable force? And because it is a morally gray area, this is what leads to people talking about and getting up in arms about police brutality. That's not to say it doesn't exist. I'm not trying to belittle any of that, but this is one of those big parts of why this is such a hotly debated topic, and why we need to approach this and understand this from an academic and neutral level. Not saying it's not out there, but I'm saying this is why this is a problem. This is why this is a discussion. The other part of this is gun violence. An officer has that level of security to maintain safety. If there is a perceived threat, they can defend themselves. So if it is perceived that the individual is going to mortally wound and harm individuals, both the public and officers, if they defend themselves and the individual dies based off of that defense, Did they really murder, or were they simply using self-defense? This is a broader debate for an ethics class. Like I said, I don't want to dive too deep into that here at this point in the class, but I want it to be known that this issue of discretion, this is where that the bigger arguments currently going on about police and police brutality and racism in our system and systemic racism and all these things, they stem from this idea that the police officer is allowed to use discretion. So we will talk way more about this when we get into those sections. But I really wanted to identify what's going on and how this is connected to some real world things. The important thing to note in particular about discretion is that the point of it is to determine the seriousness of a crime. If it's more serious, then you want to follow up. If it's not serious at all, do you really need to waste money, time, officers, things like that? And so this is where I unfortunately get to say this to some of you. If you are planning on staying in Erie or going to another smaller town and you want to go into criminal justice and you want to be a police officer, more than likely you are going to start and probably always be a patrol officer. They are the backbone of policing. They are the jack of all trades. They're the typical, you see them all around town. It's important to note that even in a slightly larger city like this, there's not a whole lot of room for specialization. I know some people get kind of starry-eyed when you think about, oh man, I want to be like NCIS. I want to do that. Unless you go to a very large city location with a robust office, like you're not going to have much of that option. It's not to belittle the job because, like I said, it's the backbone of policing. The patrol officer is the you do everything job. So it is important to know that every department and agency has different levels of specialization. And again, it just ultimately depends on the size of the area and the funding. So that's a very brief overview of police when I say police. I know this note page is not super helpful, but, sometimes just seeing some of those keywords reminds you of things. All right. Next thing I want to talk about is the courts. So if you watched my intro video, I did mention that I actually was thinking about law school. I wanted to go into law school until I realized, it wasn't for me. So while I can teach criminal justice, I can teach the whole wide spectrum, I'm really interested in law and courts. So you might notice I get really excited about this. Doesn't mean I don't like the other things. It's just this is where I'm like, oh, yes. So just like police, courts is a broad term that covers a lot of things. It's the traditional American legal system, the lawyers, the judges, the jury, all those fun things. And I want to just kind of talk about the American legal system very briefly, broad areas. There might be occasional like YouTube video pieces that I pull in for classes, kind of just supplemental to talk about things that might be a little more court based, just because, again, that's my interest area within criminal justice. But I just want to at least put it forward. The American legal system itself is adversarial in nature. If you don't know what that means, adversarial, and I'll just write the word. It is in the textbook, and our author mentions it as well, but I want to make sure that you know what I mean when I'm saying this. RIAL. Adversarial, adverse, at arms against each other. Adversarial, it is not, Oh, let's agree to work together. Oh, great. Everything is happy, hunky dory. Adversarial is they're not like me. I hate them. I'm against them. And they're thinking the same exact thing. Our criminal justice system is not the same as everywhere else in the world, which is why there gets into a lot of debates on what is okay. Again, ethics questions, not criminal justice questions. But so the system is adversarial, and that means there's always going to be two sides in every case. Typically, when we're talking criminal cases, which is going to be kind of our focus, at least here for the most part, is, the state, the government. Someone is the individuals who are saying this individual broke this law, which means that they were against this part. And then we have the defendant. And those are terms that we'll talk about again as well. But in criminal matters, there are really two sides. There's the prosecutor and the defense attorney. The prosecutor presents the government's case. Their whole point is to prove the defendant is found guilty. That is their purpose. They're meant to say, hey, look, this person broke the law without a shadow of a doubt. They did it. They need to go to prison or punished or whatever. The defense attorney, their point is to prove the defendant's innocence or diminish the responsibility that is on the individual. So they broke the law. Maybe they did, but was it because the law wasn't clear? Was it because they were new to the area and didn't know? That's the kind of stuff that they do. And so you might have heard the prosecutor and the defendant and all these things if you watch those courtroom dramas or you watch Judge Judy for the longest time. Like, you will probably be familiar with the terms, but you probably haven't thought much about what is actually going on unless you're really excited about this like I am. So with a prosecutor and defense attorney, every court actual proceeding thing, there's a judge or a magistrate. And the judge's job, despite what you think and despite what, TV tends to show us, judges are meant to oversee and ensure all the rules are followed by both parties in a particular case. The text talks about it, and I'll talk about it too. There are cases where the judge will be the main say in things, which is, how Judge Judy and Judge Joe Brown and all those TV daytime judge shows work, is where the judge acts as the jury. That's called a bench trial. But typically, the judge's primary role is just to make sure that everything is done fairly and equally. So that way it's not like one side is purposely trying to cheat the other one out, like Hollywood likes to highlight. And then the jury is literally, their whole purpose is to be the finders of fact. They're the people that decide who's innocent and who's guilty. That's it. That is their whole role. And so that's why I say the prosecutor and defense attorney, their job is to present the argument. The jury is meant to find the truth in those statements. And the judge is just there to make sure that everyone's following the rules. That's why, even though TV likes to glamorize it and do other things, that's why things like strike that from the record, jury strike that, things like that. It's for that reason, making sure that no one's breaking the rules. Okay. So, to move on to corrections. Oof. I am so sorry about my writing. I thought it would get better. It's not. So, as I kind of alluded to earlier, all these things are broader terms. So, corrections is the broad term for probation, parole, jail, prison, and other community-based sanctions. Realistically, this is, if we're following in line, if you notice it was done in the text and it's done here, the first part is the police. Police start things. They're the ones that maintain order and find things. The courts are where we make those decisions, and then corrections is where people go when it's all done. It's It's a system, step by step by step. And so this is all these levels tend to have their own issues in the broader world, in the discussion. And I'm going to pose one to you. We're not going to answer it, but I want you to think about it, and hint it might be an essay question on a future midterm or final. But we need to talk about the different ideas behind the corrections belief system. So there's the philosophy of incarceration. There's also rehabilitation. I'm just going through my notes real quickly just to make sure. So, yeah, we have rehabilitation. We have... Oh, gosh. I will find it as we're going through and I'll be like, oh, yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about. Just because my notes are a little all over the place. But I do want to... Retributive justice. That was the other one I was looking for. This is where people get into the discussion of, should we have the death penalty? Is life imprisonment a good sentence or not? This comes down to a larger discussion. So I liked the questions the text stacks, so I wanted to put them in here. Do we send people to prison as punishment or for punishment? And do we expect prisons to punish people or to rehabilitate people? I urge you to think about your own beliefs, in particular, death penalty and life in prison. And I want you to really think about it for yourself and go, is it to punish an individual, or do I want them in prison because I want them to get better? I would urge that if you believe in the death penalty or anything of that nature, you're more on the punish side. And it's not saying that it's right or wrong. That's not my place. That's not your place. But it's important to note that there are different ideas behind why we send people where we do and how we work with them. All right. So the one thing, though, that I can tell you that is across the board is any kind of correctional institute, whether it's a court, whether it's not a court, whether it's a jail, a prison, an institution, whatever it is, the whole point is to ensure public safety. That's what criminal justice is all about, ensuring the safety of the public. Going all the way back to the very first thing. It's a collection of rules and people working together to protect the public from harm. So any kind of correctional institute, their main purpose is to ensure public safety. And so I already kind of alluded a little bit to it. The more popular ones that people are familiar with, and I do want to mention, sorry about that, there is jails and then there's prison. And before you ask, yes, there is a difference between jails and prison. Jails are typically the local level. They're the smaller type. If you've watched old cartoons or anything, these are the like old Wild West places that have like 3 cells and that's it. Obviously, modern day in reality, it's not like that, but that's a good model to think about. So jails are these local level places where it's just the county sheriff is the highest person, in air quotes, for the jail. They hold several different types of prisoners, but typically it's holding people waiting for that first court appearance, which we'll talk about in a little bit. It's inmates who have convicted of minor offenses called misdemeanors. And in most states, it's usually people serving less than a year. Like if you're serving 2 or 3 months, you might just be in a jail cell, depending on the jurisdiction and the location. And then realistically, some might be there for more serious crimes like murder, but they're waiting transfer to a state prison. And that's where The difference is jail is that smaller level. Prison is more of the larger thing. It's really for the longer sentences. So they have some other services that they offer, but they're more secure. They are designed for long sentences, and they usually run at the state or federal level. There's not. I don't think there's actually a real federal jail. There's federal prison, but I don't think that there's federal jail. I'm not sure. I'll look that up and give you an answer soon. So, at the end of the day, there are these two clear distinctions in the main idea behind corrections. Again, this is not to say that there aren't other pieces. Obviously, corrections officers don't just operate within jails and prisons. They do house visits for individuals on house arrest or who have been recently released. Like, corrections is a lot more than just, oh, they're in prison. It's going to prison, in prison, and after prison. That's the corrections part. And so the big buzzword that I can't help but put here, if you can't tell what it is, I'm sorry, but justice. How do we define justice? Is it more equality where everyone is equal? Or is it more equity, you get what you deserve? That's retributive justice. It's the just desserts. It's the eye for an eye. Your prison sentence is equivalent to the crime you committed. The classic, you killed someone, you get the death penalty. That's retributive justice. That is completely equity. Equality goes, yeah, you killed someone, but you're still a person. You deserve a chance at this. Again, neither way is right or wrong. It is just the differences. And then there's another type of justice, and that's procedural. And that's where you are looking at the process. So it's the process, is the act just if it was done by a means of a fair process? This is where, we get into that classic morality question. Do you steal a loaf of bread to feed your family, or do you let your family starve? Does that mean that since you stole, you have to pay it back, but because you can't pay it back, you go to jail to work off your debt? Or something else? So it's a thought experiment. It's not meant to have a direct answer. So procedural justice is more of the equality aspect. It leaves open for debate the processes that are considered fair. This is where accessibility and predictability are the common criteria. Like, was this something that was, just happenstance, or was it pre-planned? Was it predictable? Did they go through the whole process? Or there's a lot of stuff with it. I'm not doing it justice right now. There's way too much to go into it, and didn't mean for the justice pun, so apologies on that one. But regardless of any of that, when you go into the legal system, there is this idea of due process. And I'm sure you've heard this before. If you have any familiarity or interest in criminal justice, you've probably heard the term before. But due process, this is that all legal proceedings are conducted in a fundamentally fair way. So there is a specific body of rules that you follow, and this is where we go back to our big old friend from up above. This is where we come back to the Constitution is key. The Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. So the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are really the important pieces of what determine due process. Technically speaking, and the text does talk about this, the idea of due process is there, but the wording of due process is not. And so that's why we have debates over what is and is not allowed in certain places. So, yeah, it's important to note that the Constitution, I mentioned, it's key. This is how we determine due process. This is how we determine what is allowed and what's not allowed. And so, just to kind of think about it, and this is where I am going to pull up the textbook in particular. Oh, no, 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 no. I want to go here. No, I want to go back one more. It's still under major components. So I want to talk about this. The Fifth Amendment. So the Fifth and the 14th Amendment are the two ones that are connected most to due process. But I really want to focus on the Fifth Amendment just real quickly. It's part of the chapter. It's also part of what I want to talk about here. But the Fifth Amendment. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. If you noticed as I went through that, there's only one period. That is a long run-on sentence. That's important because this is why there's a lot of interpretation. Most of the amendments are long sentences that have multiple pieces in there. So saying, oh, it's the Fifth Amendment. What part of the Fifth Amendment? There's several things. And so legal scholars and lawyers will call particular sections of these clauses. And this is an English term. So my other thing that I'm good at, English teaching, this is where I get to say, a clause is a fragment, a part of a sentence. So one clause would be this wonderful big long chunk, no person shall be held to answer for a capital or likewise infamous case unless that is a clause. Nor shall any person be subject to the same offense to be put twice in jeopardy of life or limb. That's a clause. That's the double jeopardy thing where you cannot be tried for the same crime twice. That's where it pulls that idea from. Nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law. That's the big one. That's the one that people point to. Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Those are all the different clauses within the Fifth Amendment. And so it's important to note that just saying the Fifth Amendment, it's great, but there's several pieces that are being discussed there. And that's the same across the board. And this is why there's debate over what is constitutional and what isn't. Because remember, the Constitution was written a long time ago. There have been amendments made to it, but it's not like it was written 20 years ago. This was written a lot longer than 20 years ago. So things have changed. Some things exist that didn't exist. So it's important to remember that this is how this kind of larger piece works. All right. This already feels like a long video, so I'm going to take a short break. I'm going to end this video. I'll pick up the next video where we're going to talk about the roles, particularly of the legislature, the judiciary branch, things like, and the executive branch. We'll talk about that, and we'll probably wrap up with the criminal justice process. That might be in the next video or might be a third video. But this will all be one giant note page, so check that out. But yeah, thanks for listening. Hopefully you learned something. Read the chapter if you haven't done so already. Bye for now.